Hello and welcome. Today, we're going to dive deep and unpack the engine room of the world's largest democracy, India's legislative system. You know, from those grand halls of parliament in New Delhi all the way to the assemblies in every single state, this is where the voices of over 1 billion people are supposed to be heard. So, let's get right into it.
All right, here's what we've got on the agenda. We'll kick things off with why a parliament was even needed in the first place. Then we'll map out how it's all structured. After that, we'll get to know the two houses, figure out who can actually become a member, and finally, we'll look at the all-important rules that are supposed to hold them accountable. Okay, so first things first. Why go through all the trouble of building this absolutely massive, complex system? Well, the answer isn't just a political science concept. It's rooted deep, deep in India's history and its long fight for freedom.
So let's ask that question directly. Why does India even need a parliament? I mean, really, think about it. It's so much more than just a big, impressive building. It's a powerful idea, a solution to a problem that defined an entire era of the nation's past.
And this right here, this really gets to the heart of it all. Under colonial rule, it was simple. Decisions were made by a handful of people and imposed on everyone else. The public had absolutely no say. So the entire struggle for independence was, at its core, a fight for participation. It was a demand for the right to have a voice in your own government, through people you actually choose.
So how do you make that happen? Well, the main tool is something called the Universal Adult Franchise. And it's a revolutionary idea, really. One person, one vote. This single principle ensures that the government is a reflection of the will of all its adult citizens, not just, a privileged few. It's the absolute bedrock of the whole system.
Okay, so we've got the why locked down. Now let's get into the how. How is this whole thing built? India didn't just wing it. It adopted a very specific, well-thought-out structure for its lawmaking bodies. And honestly, it's quite an elegant design.
So, the model India chose is a parliamentary system. It was heavily inspired by the British Westminster model. And the key word here is interdependent. See, unlike in a presidential system where the president is separate, here the government, that's the prime minister and the cabinet, they actually come from the parliament and have to answer to the parliament. They're linked.
And what's really fascinating about India's setup is this parallel structure. It's brilliant, actually. At the national or union level, you've got the president and 2 houses of parliament. Now, look over at the state level. It's almost a perfect mirror image, with a governor and the state legislative houses. What this means is, if you can get your head around one, you pretty much understand the other.
Right. Let's head to the center of it all, the national parliament, and zoom in on its 2 crucial chambers, the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. They might look similar from the outside, but they have very, very different jobs, different members, and different reasons for existing.
First up, we have the Lok Sabha, which literally translates to the House of the People. This is the big one. This is the main stage, where the members of parliament, or MPs, are chosen directly by you, the voters, in general elections every 5 years. You can think of it as the direct, raw, unfiltered voice of the Indian people.
Now, let's contrast that with the Rajya Sabha, the Council of States. Its purpose is totally different. While the Lok Sabha represents the people directly, the Rajya Sabha is there to represent the states themselves. Its members aren't chosen by the public, but by the folks who are already elected to each state's legislature. This also gives it a different character. It's a permanent, continuous body that never completely dissolves.
The Rajya Sabha also has this really unique feature. 12 of its members aren't elected at all. They're actually nominated by the President of India. Now, this is designed specifically to bring experts and highly accomplished people into the lawmaking process. People from the arts, sciences, social service. Folks who might not want to or be able to win a messy direct election, but whose wisdom is considered valuable for the country.
So, we've talked about the houses, but who are the actual people who get to sit in them? It's not just a matter of winning a popularity contest. There are some fundamental, non-negotiable criteria that every single aspiring lawmaker has to meet. The journey to becoming a lawmaker can really be broken down into 3 essential steps. First, you have to meet the basic qualifications. No getting around that. Second, you have to actually get elected, or in some cases, nominated. And third, before you can even think about taking your seat, you have to formally take an oath to uphold the Constitution of India.
So what are those core qualifications? Well, for starters, you have to be an Indian citizen and a registered voter. But then check out the age difference, because it really tells a story about the role of each house. You only need to be 25 to get into the House of the People, the Lok Sabha. But to sit in the Council of States, the Rajya Sabha, often seen as the more deliberative upper house, you need to be at least 30 years old.
You know, getting elected is one thing, but staying in office, that's a whole other ballgame. The system has some really important checks and balances built right in to try and make sure that lawmakers play by the rules.
So that raises the obvious question, right? What happens when a lawmaker crosses a line? Well, it's not left to chance. The Constitution and a few other key laws lay out some very clear and very serious grounds for being disqualified.
A member can actually lose their hard-won seat for a bunch of reasons. This can range from things that create a conflict of interest, like holding a paid government job, to personal legal troubles, like being bankrupt. And of course, there are more serious matters, like if they decide to become a citizen of another country, or if they're convicted of a major crime and sentenced to 2 or more years in prison.
Now, this next one is probably one of the most talked about and debated set of rules, the anti-defection law. This was brought in to solve a really specific problem that was plaguing Indian politics, party hopping. Basically, elected members would switch parties, often for money or position, completely betraying the people who voted for them on a specific party's ticket.
So what actually triggers this law? Well, a member is in hot water if they just voluntarily quit their party. They also risk disqualification if they vote against their party's official instruction on a key issue. The rule also applies to independents who join a party after being elected, and even nominated members have a 6-month window to join a party, but not after that. It's all about enforcing loyalty to the platform they won on.
Okay, but here's a crucial detail. Who actually makes the final call? Who's the referee? And it's different depending on the foul. For those general disqualifications we talked about, the president or the governor makes the decision, but, and this is key, they must follow the recommendation of the Election Commission. When it comes to defection, though, the power is inside the House itself. It's the Speaker or the Chairman who decides. That is a huge difference in where the power lies.
And all of this leaves us with one final, big question to think about. We've looked at the structure, we've seen the rules, and we've talked about the checks. But in a democracy as massive, as chaotic, and as vibrant as India's, the question always remains. Are these rules on paper enough to make sure that our leaders are truly, genuinely accountable to the millions